Hello, and welcome to Media Evil, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifdecker, a medieval historian, and today we'll be continuing our discussion of Wheel of Time. So welcome back to former co-host Ollie Brady.
Hey Sarah, it's great to be back. And I just want you to know that I have edited the first part of that video and cut out conservatively 45 minutes of me talking. So hopefully your listeners will have gone through that first episode and gone, this is refreshing how little I hear Ollie's voice throughout this podcast.
Hopefully you also cut out all of the numerous animal interventions so they won't wonder what is all of that weird scratching in the background.
I cut out most of it, but sometimes Carmen's a little bit adorable, so people kind of want to hear that little meow.
Yeah, it's pretty cute.
Murphy, on the other hand, he's just like, I'm old. I'm not gonna do nothing. Sarah, I think in this episode we're gonna talk about the religion in Wheel of Time and the links to actual medieval related stuff.
Yes, I'm very excited. So let's get into it.
Sarah, could you talk a little bit about how race and ethnicity is covered in the books? And I will do my best not to be like, well, as a white man.
I mean, well, I'm also a white woman who is, contributing to this. But I will say I do appreciate this is clearly a diverse pre-modern world. And I've talked about this in the podcast before, but the real medieval world is in fact more diverse than, people imply or assume or give it credit for. And in addition, again, it's fantasy. People are using magic. We don't have to if we can suspend disbelief about people burning people out of existence with magic fire, we can suspend disbelief about there being people of color. So there are numerous different countries, each of which seems to have a predominant but not exclusive ethnic makeup. There are clearly people who travel to those countries. There also seems to be some amount of physical appearance seems to some extent to determine how people kind of guess what country you're from, but also it's accent in the way you dress. And so it is interesting is that it does indicate that there is diversity even in these individual countries. And we have in particular cities that are clearly visibly multi-ethnic in a way that does very much recall to me some of these kind of cities of the Mediterranean that have these multi-ethnic and in the medieval world, multi-religious populations.
So Abu Dhar, Tyr, they are very, very Mediterranean inspired.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain that Abu Dhar is meant to represent Italy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Tyr is meant to represent Spain.
Yeah, no, and those both definitely make sense. Yeah. And and so I do appreciate that. And the fact also, of course, is where it is important to note that there is also a predominantly black nation. So the Shanshan. The one thing that is a little bit odd in some ways is that we do then have the Shanshan are the only place where slavery is legal. However, it is, I think, important to acknowledge that slavery, as it was in the medieval Mediterranean, is in no way ever race-based in this world. It's based, it seems, on a combination of basically kind of practicality and captivity. So some of the people who are enslaved under the Shanshan are people that they just capture in wartime, but it's also then based on ability. So in particular, that the attitude of the Shanshan toward anyone who can channel, well, the attitude toward men that can channel is bye, you're dead, which is pretty much everyone's attitude. For good reason, yes. And the attitude toward women who can channel, however, is that they are too dangerous to be allowed to exist and use their abilities independently. And so they are controlled with a magical/scientific device, essentially, that there's this collar that is placed upon them, and they are then enslaved and essentially are unable to disobey the women to whom they are connected. And there is this kind of interesting dynamic that you eventually do find out that the women who are able to hold the other end of the collar are women who are like would be able to learn how to channel. Yeah.
So yeah, we probably should have brought that up, is that there are two types of channeling or conducting electricity. Something which is naturally a conductor or can naturally channel and will always be able to do it, or something which can learn to conduct electricity or can be forced to conduct electricity if they're able to do it. So think of it as a pure conductor versus a semiconductor.
I don't know anything about electricity, but yeah, so you have these people who are, so the Damana are the women who are able to, like, who are then enslaved, and then the Sultan are the are the people who, like, to whom they are then, like, directly enslaved. This then also has the interesting dynamic. So in addition to the fact that slavery is not race-based, so many of the Damana are local, but they also increasingly, especially as the books go on and the Shanchan become more active in these other lands, like, you know, they are capturing people from those lands. But it also has then the interesting connection to the real medieval world that slavery is predominantly a female phenomenon, or disproportionately so at least. In the real medieval world, this is because much of slavery, like you don't have in the medieval world, you don't have plantation slavery. So slavery is essentially mostly domestic, including reproductive, that you would basically expect slaves to produce other slaves and also produce children for who might be the children of their master because they're being raped. And then in addition, when they're producing children, that also makes them able to serve as wet nurses for the children of their master or for other children who, you know, they would be like hired out to, basically. So, you know, this is obviously a very different phenomenon, but it does have the kind of interesting connection. And the other interesting connection is that one of the areas in which you don't have predominantly female slavery is the Mamluk slave soldiers, where slavery is like essentially a military function. And that is, I would say, also kind of akin to the Damana in a lot of ways, because the assumption is like they are the ultimate weapon, because while the Aes Sedai don't use the one power in battle unless they're fighting dark friends, they're not allowed to, or in self-defense.
It's one of the oaths they take, so they're not allowed to use it as a weapon unless somebody is directly attacking
right
them.
Or against dark friends.
Whereas the Damane, they don't have that limitation. So when the Shankan come over from the far off distant lands of Shankan, so when they come over, it's like party time. They're just blowing up armies left, right, and center because they can. Whereas over here, God damn it, over in Randland, as I like to call it, where Rand comes from, nobody can use it as a weapon unless they are evil.
Right.
And that's why a lot of people instinctively assume the Shankan are evil incarnate, but they're not. They're, let's just say, misguided.
Yeah, and I think there are kind of interesting hints at the end, especially like the fact that there is this realization that they have not fully grappled with, but that you get the sense that they're maybe in that direction of grappling with the fact that if you are a Suldam, that means that you too could in fact channel. That, you know, it seems like there's a kind of possibility of them perhaps going in a different direction. So, you know, we unfortunately do have this like one slave holding society. And there is something that like on the one hand, it's like, you know, I appreciate that to some extent it like undoes a kind of to some extent undoes like a kind of oversimplified analysis or very clear kind of mapping onto the real, say, like early modern world that like that, but on the other hand, it is kind of weird that like you do have the predominantly black country is the only place that has slaves.
Now, this is something I brought up with this before, so I'm going to bring this up because I know that a few people that I have interacted with online are going to listen to this in things. So I just want to say this very, very clearly. There are a group of fans of the Wheel of Time who, they're American, and they have, and as I'm saying, this is July the 4th where I am, so happy Independence Day.
This is also July the 4th.
But,
oh no, it's not July the 4th yet here. It's July the 3rd, tomorrow's July 4th.
Sorry, Sarah, you're in the past. Right?
I don't know what time it is or day.
In the Wheel of Time, every country can be seen as, an allusion to a real world medieval stroke European country from the early modern period, right? So as I said, there's the equivalent of Spain, there's the equivalent of England, there's the equivalent of, the Aiel represent Irish people living in the desert. It's hilarious because they're pale skinned and red haired. That's how they're described.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they represent Irish people. Robert Jordan described them specifically as a joke, as what is the worst possible thing to have in the desert. He was like, well, I'm going to write all my descriptions of them as pale skinned and red haired. And the only reason that they're ever described as dark skinned is because that's what happens.
Like they're tan, right?
White people who've been in the desert, they get tanned. But anyway, that's beside the point. But everything else is representing a nation. There's no Americans.
Obviously
in this,
not.
Right? So a lot of American fans, and this is not a small number, there are a lot of American fans who have somehow taken on the idea that the Shan-Can, right, represent America, in particular, represent the Union. Represent the Confederacy.
Yeah, what I think is insane, and if it were true, would be downright goddamn offensive.
It would be 100% offensive. They reckon that it represents the thing. They don't call it the Confederacy, they call it Dixie, because they don't want people to say, you're clearly being racist here. So they go, it represents Dixie, the Southern, right? Because, the slaves and stuff. And you're like going, that is at the level of surface reading, that I would expect a child who sees a book that says "See Spot Run" thinks that all dogs should be called Spot.
Right.
They have slaves. They are predominantly a black character. The best analogy for this would be that if all of the Europeans who were sent and started taking over African countries in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, if they integrated fully into the society, created one mega country, put an empress on top of it, and then decided to come back and take Europe back.
Right.
That's about as close as analogy as you're going to get to what the Shan-Can actually represent, and what the country the Shan-Can represent. But to sit and say that it represents Dixie because they have slaves and it's a country on the other side of the world is that's ridiculous. Stupidest stuff I have ever heard. Sorry, just want to get it off my chest.
Absolutely ridiculous.
All the time from, and again, I love Americans, some of you, but it's always American fans who do this.
We are as a group terrible.
Well, you're not. There are a lot of going. But it's again, because I spent so many years online and forums and stuff. You don't have to be represented in the book. Just because Robert Jordan is an American writer, he doesn't have to have an analogy to America. If you want to take an analogy to America then just say the Two Rivers represents small town America.
Right. And it's like part of England, but it like kind of doesn't want to be and forgets England exists.
That's exactly what I like to say. And they always go, no, but it's so small. It's like,
it doesn't matter.
America doesn't have to be the biggest. Like, just assume the Two Rivers represents America, was part of England and is no.
Or nothing represents America is also fine.
Yeah, or nothing represents America. Sorry, I just want to get it off my chest. If you're listening to this and you think that the Shan-Can in any way represent the Southern United States, the Confederate United States, Dixie, you're an idiot.
And you should maybe check yourself and how you're thinking about the world and race.
Thinking about anything.
Yes. And as I said, I do actually think it is a really important distinction that starting in the early modern period, essentially, slavery becomes race-based. And there are justifications that certain groups of people, in particular Black Africans, are suited to be slaves because of their race/ethnicity. This is an early modern phenomenon. And this is obviously and early modern and modern phenomenon. It is obviously the way in which slavery was defined in the American South. And, it is not how slavery worked in the Middle Ages. And as I said, the way that slavery works in the Shanshan Empire is much more like the way you see slavery working in the real Mediterranean. in that like anybody can be enslaved if you're basically unlucky.
Also, I think an important thing about the Shankin is they are a predominantly black society. They are described in terms of ancient Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have an empress. They're caste, well, I was going to say caste society, but they have layers to their society, and you're at a level, and you can be moved up or down at the whim of the empress. The way their interactions are described, with the bowing, the constant respect being shown,
Mm-hmm.
small mannerisms being taken as a deadly insult. Like there's like, it's all reads as, yeah, it's the best described, like samurai,
like
culture,
feudal Japan,
right? Or like feudal Japan. And I think that's what he was getting at. I don't think he was saying, oh, this is sexy. He was saying this is a made up thing that represents everywhere that's not the equivalent.
And well, one of the things in general, I do actually think reading this, I see what you're saying about like the Spain and Italy comments, but on the other hand, like, I don't actually reading this see there being, like, I don't actually see there being that like pure obvious analogies for most of these countries. Like, I think most of the countries are in a lot of ways like a blend of traits from different, like, even parts of the world in the Middle Ages are then mapped onto these different countries. Like, I don't think any of them is like a pure, like, this is England.
He's taking parts of certain cultures and then using them as a starting point for the rest.
Right. And, you know, I mean, the geography also clearly does not like map onto then what the real geography would have been. It's a world that in a lot of ways like is much closer together and united than like people of these countries that we've talked about are in reality in the Middle Ages, although, you know, to some extent a little bit more closely tied in the early modern period. You know, so there are definitely like it's very much like there are jumping off points and connections, but nothing's quite one-to-one.
Yeah, it's well written. If you're looking for it, you'll see the connections. Yeah. You'll be like, oh, well, that makes sense. I mean, it's easy to make the connection between Andor and England. It's got a queen. Symbol is a rose. Like,
right.
Like, the rest of the thing is not England.
Right.
Like, I mean, you could talk about, oh, London is because of X, Y, and Z, whatever. But it's not these read like English people.
No.
They don't really, but they've got round-shaped helmets like Saxon army soldiers would have had and stuff like that. So, but again, they're all small things that are taken in from a bigger thing to make a bigger story.
Yeah. So another thing that kind of came up for me and, you know, and thinking about some of these different countries as well is the fact that I really appreciate that there's an actual goddamn economy.
I knew this was coming. Like, as soon as Sarah was reading, it was like, we're going to be talking. We'll talk about the money.
Like, I'm an economic historian. This is what I do, and like, you know, this drives me nuts about Game of Thrones, and I won't get into that. But just the short version is Game of Thrones. There's no economy, and in Wheel of Time, like, there's an actual economy. Like, they talk about like that there's like a famine and they have to deal with food supply. They talk about and like what that costs and what that entails. Like, they talk about the fact that they have to pay mercenaries. They talk about trade and that like there's a trade war between countries. Like, and so I really appreciate that, is that like the economy exists and it matters in terms of how the world works and in terms of how rulership works. And then that also kind of gets into the fact that like there's a lot of socioeconomic diversity, which again is something that is true to the medieval world. Like, there are not just lords and knights and downtrodden peasants. There are also, like, this is a period of growing urbanization, which means that there are cities that have, you know, blacksmiths and textile workers and innkeepers, etc. And so, like, and merchants. And these groups of people who are consistently underrepresented in a lot of fantasy are really well represented here, that we have practitioners of artisanal trades. Like, there's a whole scene, there's at least one whole scene that I remember that like they're talking about like buying dresses and like we're working with the textile merchants. There are innkeepers, there are a lot of merchants, you know, we have the mercenaries, you know, we also have farmers and the nobility, but those aren't the only people. And then there's the Aes Sedai who, who don't have a kind of pure connection. I mean, to some extent there's links with the medieval university system, but not purely so. But, within the Aes Sedai, that like, it's interesting that there are people who are essentially like political strategists, and then people who are, and people who are essentially kind of researchers and academics, so linked to that military thing, and also like healers and doctors, basically, in the Yellow Aja. And so I really like that I think it's better world building inherently, but also it is something that kind of ties it back to the real medieval world in terms of what you learn about it if you're doing anything beyond the like, there were knights and sometimes they were nice and sometimes they were mean, which is what like 85% of people know about the Middle Ages, to be honest.
Sarah, all knights are bad. They always have been, always will.
Unless they like work with King Arthur.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That's what most people think of about the Middle Ages. And it's like, no, this is like, there's growing urbanization. There are universities, there are medical schools, there are law schools. And so I really like that you see more of that population in this world. And that, as I said, I think it makes the world richer. I think because there's like an actual economy, it makes it make more sense. And as I said, it is a kind of nice parallel with medieval reality.
It's what I like about it as well is, well, I like everything, right? But what I like about it is that we meet a character called Bail Doman in the first book, and he's a river captain, and he's on the river and he's sailing up, and he's talking about his cargo in a way that makes sense. So he's like, I've got textiles here because they've got silks, so I'm heading upriver to where they can't make silk. And when I'm up there, I'm going to sell this for big money, and I'm going to replace it with peppers, which are grown. From the way he describes it, I think he's talking about chili peppers as opposed to bell peppers.
Right, they're ice peppers, right, is the term used. And they're clearly they're clearly spicy.
And he's going to sell there, and he's going to load up on ice peppers and bring them back down because he's heading back down to Spain. Oh my God, Spanish food is known for being relatively spicy.
And the spice trade is actually a big deal in the Middle Ages as well.
And it makes sense. I also like the fact that the money makes sense. It's not just coppers, silvers, gold. They talk about how different currencies from different countries are worth
they talk about currency exchange. I love it. I love it so much.
It's like a person goes into a shop and uses a Tarvalin mark, and they're like, so a mark is like a pound, right, or a dollar, right? But he goes in, he pays with a Tarvalin dollar, and there's an exchange rate. It's like, oh, well, they're a heavier, better quality silver in the coin, so you get this. You're like,
which is cool, because then there's also doesn't actually ever talk about this, but there's like hints that like in the real Middle Ages, there are probably monarchs that like devalued the currency as a way to earn money.
Yeah, it's also a metric system.
Yeah.
So there's like 10 copper pennies is 1 silver penny. 10 silver pennies is 1 silver crown, right? Or sorry, 100 silver pennies is 1.
That is not true to the real medieval monetary system, which is obnoxious as fuck.
Yeah, with the original one?
Right, they have like the 12 denarii, the 12 pence to a shilling, in the English terms, the 12 pence to a shillings and 20 shillings to a pound. Because the basis goes back to the Roman monetary system.
Which is crazy.
It's cool.
It's not cool, Sarah. You think it's cool.
I think it's cool because I'm like reading these documents, and then I like, because I take pride that like I read these documents and I like know how to like say like, okay, like how many like solidi is the Latin term for shilling. So that like I know how many solidi are in a libra.
Anybody who thinks that it's an acceptable system to have 12 pennies to a shilling, 20 shillings to a pound, therefore 240 pennies in a pound, is insane.
Do you know how the Roman calendar works?
I don't know. Probably per.
Okay, so in terms of how you refer to days, and this is a Roman thing, and then it also shows up in medieval documents, and it's like still being used in the 13th and 14th century with the stuff that I look at. That the days that actually like you refer to are the Calends, which is the first of the month, the Nones, which is either the 5th or 7th of the month, and the Ides, which is either the 13th or the 15th of the month. And you know, based on how many days the month have, which is right, the Ides of March. So then every other day is like the 3rd of the Ides of March. So that's how you would say the 13th of March is the 3rd of the Ides of March. And it gets even worse when you get to like the end of the month after the Ides. Then it's like, oh, today is the 17th of the you would be like, oh, today is the 17th of the Calends of January, and that means it's like late December. I'm not doing the math in my head about which day that would be, but it's so annoying.
Sarah, how is religion covered in the Wheel of Time? And also, I can't believe we didn't mention the Spanish Inquisition.
Yes.
Who are running around wearing white cloaks for the entire series.
Yes, the Children of Light, or the White Cloaks, yes, are like very clearly the Spanish Inquisition. And it's really interesting also because like their like big thing is like that they're actually, I would say, disproportionately targeting women and like the Tarvalon witches.
Oh, they definitely are. They're
so they have characteristics that are kind of linked to the Spanish Inquisition in terms of their structure, but then also they are very much like the kind of early modern witch hunting, which like was actually, it existed in Spain, but they were like more busy worrying about secret Jews than they were about witches. So like the height of witch persecution is really like Germany, England, France, I would say. Like those are the like big centers of bothering with witches.
Sarah, do you know what the best way to find a secret Jew is? Mm-hmm. Secret ham.
It's true.
Just for people listening, that's not me just randomly being racist. Sarah explained to me the concept of secret ham at one of the first times we met in person. I was like, wow, that's actually genuinely fascinating.
Yeah, like Spain has an excessive amount of like surprise ham and things, which, you know, I don't keep kosher, but I was a vegetarian the first time I was over there and like kept getting surprise ham and also had a very hard time like, explaining things. I would be like, okay, I'm a vegetarian, no meat, no fish. And then they'd look at me, they'd be like, no ham. And then they'd be like, oh, okay. And then they'd bring me something and be like, this just has a little ham. And this happened like a lot. And I am convinced, and will one day write the book about the fact that I am convinced that this is like a way of rooting out secret Jews and Muslims. It's also a good way to find the bad Jews like me who really like the secret ham.
Wait, apparently even when you were a vegetarian.
No, when I was a vegetarian, I was with a friend when I was over there, and I would legit like pick out the little pieces of ham and give them to my friend who was, you know, not kosher or vegetarian or anything. And so my friend Abby would like eat all of these like little ham bits.
Wow, Abby, I hope you're listening. It turns out that we now know that you're squirreling away ham. So how does religion work in the Wheel of Time?
So I would say a lot of it seems to be, and I'm not going to talk too much about it just because this is not really my area. It seems to be, in terms of how they talk about like the wheel and the pattern, it seems to be more akin to Buddhism, I would say, than it does to like Christianity or Judaism or Islam. There are, however, like things here and there in terms of like the cyclical aspect and even like the reincarnation aspect, which you do definitely see in like Kabbalah, which is interesting, in Jewish mysticism, which has like some weird reincarnation shit happening. So like so like some of that definitely like, sorry, my cat was being weird. So like some of that definitely like connects in some interesting ways. But the thing that I thought was really cool that I first just noticed when I was reading is that, so you have the Dark One, and the Dark One his true name is Shaitan. I know I'm not supposed to say it, right? Because he must not be named. Thanks J.K. Rowling for stealing that shit. So obviously, you know, sounds like Satan, and in fact, the specific form that's used is pretty similar actually to the form in Arabic to Islam. It's very much, you know, sounds basically the same. So, you know, there's clear kind of connections there to the concept of Satan / the devil, which, you know, takes various different manifestations in the different Abrahamic faiths, but exists and is referred to some extent in all of them. And then there's the Forsaken, who are cool because a number of them have names that definitely reference a number of other kind of demon, like kind of big deal demons, essentially. Or actually, the one other thing I was going to say about the Dark One, and the fact that the Dark One is presented as being close to a power equivalent to the Creator.
The Great Lord is true all things. I mean, sorry, the Dark One. I definitely didn't just call him the Great Lord.
That's how you know.
That's what the bad guys call him.
Also something J.K. Rowling stole, that there's like the way that you refer to Voldemort, that means that you're kind of with Voldemort, and the way that you refer to Voldemort, that means you're not. Yeah. So the idea of it, like, so it is almost this kind of dualist system where like good and evil are essentially equal opposing forces. And that was definitely a essentially minority and then explicitly declared heretical thread within Christianity. So the kind of early version of this is the Manichaean heresy. The version which really pops up in the like 12th, 13th century is the Cathars, are this kind of substantial group in southern France who are essentially kind of followers of a dualistic heresy that would say basically that the devil is equally powerful to God.
What I like about this one and how it links back to you talking about history is the idea that God won that battle and has locked the Dark One away, but that some people who are evil are trying to release him, which is pretty much how the devil and being in hell and wanting to get to hell is represented. And we have people who are trying to summon demons and, summon the devil back up, or, get people impregnated with the devil's baby. I've never seen Rosemary's Baby. It's directed by a pedophile, and I'm not going to watch it. But, so effectively, I like that system that they put in, because it's really hanging a lamp on the idea of good and evil without saying this is God and this is the devil.
And the fact, as I said, like, again, kind of connected to this dualist heresy, like the fact that, like, I think it's, but also, I mean, this is certainly something that shows up in Christianity and to some extent Judaism. Like, you can't actually like fully you don't fully defeat and get rid of the devil. Like, it's not like he's dead and gone. And this is even like something big that comes up at the end, that Rand at first, he's like, I'm going to kill the devil. And then like Rand's like, oh no, actually that's not a thing that I can or should do.
Yeah, I can just lock you away and I can do as well as I can, but I can't kill you because you need to be there.
Which I think is interesting. But then as the other thing that I thought was fun as I was reading it was that I started to notice that a number of the names of the Forsaken are drawn from Jewish and Christian demonology. So
yeah, the Forsaken, we kind of touched on a little bit. They're the powerful leaders of the Dark Friends, right? They're all evil male and female channelers. They don't go mad because the Dark One is protecting them from the taint that's on it in the men. The easiest way to think about him is because there's 13 of them, is Ishamal, who's the leader, is Jesus, and then he has 12 disciples.
Bad Jesus.
And bad Jesus.
And then Rand is good Jesus.
He's the Jesus, and Rand is good Jesus, which happens in book 12, where he becomes basically Jesus Rand. And he's such a hippie at that point. He's like, hey,
the flowers spring up. The flowers spring up as he walks by. It's very cute. It's very cute, yeah.
It's so funny. Okay, so tell me about these demons.
Yes, so Asmodean, the member of the Forsaken that Rand like briefly captures, that name clearly comes from the demon king Asmodeus, who pops up first in the Book of Tobit and also shows up frequently in the Talmud, and is considered in Talmudic literature in particular to be the consort of Lilith, who is somebody who I'm going to talk about in a bit, as not exactly as explicit, but I have thoughts.
I'm going to assume, I'm not reading your notes, and I don't know who Lilith is, but based on where Asmodean is in the books, I'm assuming Lilith is somehow connected to Lilith.
Yes, I have opinions about that. So, but yeah, okay. So which I'm not going to say I'm the first person who's thought of that before, but it was not. This one was definitely like not in the wiki. Like, this is my cool. Independently formulated theory.
I don't know who Lilith is, except for Fraser's ex-wife.
I will talk about that.
You talk about Fraser's ex-wife. Yes.
Actually, to some extent, yes. Not like in a giant. Like I have not actually seen Frasier, and the only thing that that's one of the very few things I know. But I actually feel like that's like extremely weird for reasons that will become clear when I talk about Lilith.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So, but before that, we have Belial, which is linked to Belial, who's one of the princes of hell. Ishamael's alias Baalzamon, which is also kind of linked with the Dark One himself, is not that different from Beelzebub, especially when you use the Hebrew, which is Baalzavuv.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not a little changed, but not that changed. Samael is another of the Forsaken. That's also the name of a figure who's in Judaism is seen as being this basically archangel who was like the mean one. And she was the enemy of Israel.
Well, that makes sense with Samael.
Yeah. To some extent, he actually even has a role in the Talmud, which is more like the role actually taken on by Satan in Christianity. So that's clearly, and it's the same name, except that typically that Samael in Wheel of Time is spelled with 2 M's, and it's typically only spelled with 1 M in Jewish tradition. There is also one non-Western or non-Abrahamic link, which is Raven probably comes from Hindu mythology and to reference a demon king named Ravana, who was, by the way, known to have a number of lovers who were varying degrees of consensual. So
he was also arrogant, which is Raven's entire downfall.
Yeah. So that's definitely a parallel. So, and then there is Lanfear. And I am convinced, despite the fact that there is not any direct justification for this, that she is supposed to be a connection with Lilith. So Lilith is not actually in the Bible. But if you read the Bible, you know how there's like 2 different stories about the creation of men and women.
First of all, I'll stop you there when you say if.
I know you read your Bible every day like a good Christian.
When I read my Bible. but go on.
So if you read the Bible, there are 2 different stories of the creation of humankind. The first, in terms of, the order of the chapters, is that it says basically God created people, male and female, he created them. And so implying that essentially he created them simultaneously. Then there is the version that is more familiar to most people, which is that it says that woman was created from man's rib.
Yeah, so men came first.
Right, so that God just created
Am I right, ladies? Am I right?
Men came first and only. So, the real reason that there are these 2 different passages, sorry, biblical literalists and people who believe God wrote the Bible, the real reason is that God didn't write the Bible and they like mashed together 2 different versions and they were like, fuck it, we'll keep both.
These people actually think God wrote the Bible.
Some people still do. That was my very brief explanation of the documentary hypothesis. The explanation that some rabbis in, I think the earliest version is maybe the 5th century, came up with is that it's actually referring to 2 different creations. So that first, Adam was created with a wife, Lilith. And basically that Lilith didn't work out because Lilith was not sufficiently subservient to him and wanted to like do her own fucking thing and wouldn't have sex with him and therefore sucked. And so she took off and became a demon.
Okay. So
like
I'm starting to see where your Lanfear connection is coming in.
And then Eve is created as his, and then the creation from the rib is basically God, like Adam's like, God, the fuck. And God says like, all right, got it. I'll create this woman out of your rib so she'll be properly subservient to you. And that is the creation of Eve. So Lanfear has this sexual romantic past with Luz Theron, and that is presented as like being to some extent the sort that she has essentially this kind of love-hate thing happening with him. which does, I would say, have some kind of connections to the like idea of basically like Lilith as this like first wife figure or first sexual partner figure who then leaves/is rejected in favor of like the better one because she's more subservient and boring. And then also as an additional interesting corollary, Lanfear is connected on a number of occasions with the moon. She's referred to as Moon Hunter by the wolves, the name that she uses as her alias when she's pretending she's not Lanfear for a bit of Selene, which is the moon goddess. And Lilith is also associated with the moon and with nighttime, and in particular going and stealing and murdering babies at night.
Wow.
And I, by the way, think it is questionable as a choice in Frasier that they're like, let's name his ex-wife Lilith, implying, I guess, that she's a literal demon, like baby-eating demon.
But anyway, yeah, they're the Forsaken, and they're linked to demons and stuff, which is, I would never talk. I mean, again, I would have done a lot of looking at this stuff in the past, and for example, I know about Belial, and Belial as a character in the Wheel of Time gets something like 11 lines.
Yeah.
And most of them are just before he gets killed by Moiraine, because Belial is the second best swordsman from back in the day, and he is trying to challenge Rand to have a fight. And Moiraine finds out through the help of some brown sisters that Belial was an amazing swordsman, and sees that Rand is about to fight Belial, and she's like, and she shoots him.
Fucking not.
Yeah, definitely not. And she kills him, which is great because that's the first time one of the Forsaken dies from a direct, pure action of somebody who knows what they're doing. There's a couple who die in the first book, but like the Green Man kills one of them.
Yeah.
And Sophista, and Rand kills one without realizing what he's at. So this is the first time one of the Forsaken was killed by a person. She's killed by Moiraine because she's a badass, which is good.
Yeah.
Also, just actually when speaking, does the Green Man have an equivalent historical figure or mythical figure?
Yeah, I mean that's and the Green Man is a definitely like I believe like pre-Christian myth, like kind of pagan myth, and like there are still like you can still see like Green Man carvings in various places in particularly the British Isles, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that he's linked to pagan stories, the idea of somebody who comes along and spreads growth and comes with the spring effectively. Yeah.
And then, of course, the other obvious, I will just at least briefly mention the other obvious connection to medieval related things is that there's like, because he's not a character, really.
I just think this is funny, guys, because we're going down through Sarah's notes as we get this. And I'm like, what links could Sarah find to the medieval period? I'm thinking, well, obviously, what we're about to talk about. And I'm like, how did we get this far before this has come up? So basically, this is a post King Arthur world.
Yeah, so it refers to Arthur Pendrag Tenreal is his name. So obviously Arthur Pendrag, obviously that's Arthur Pendragon. He's known as Arthur Hawkwing. The reason we haven't really mentioned him is that it's a post Arthur world. Like, and he doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't matter that much, except that we find out. Sorry, it's 1,000 years ago from Arthur Hawkwing, not 10,000.
Right.
We find out that Arthur Hawkwing, King Arthur, as a lot of the legends say, that he went downhill in his later, before he died or whatever, that it was actually Moradin who corrupted him.
Which makes sense because that's a connection with Mordred, obviously, based on the names. Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's so subtle that that's mentioned. It's just like, I whispered in Hawkwing's ear, and so Hawkwing's army, we mentioned the Shankin earlier. Hawkwing's armies are the armies he sent halfway around the world. And the reason that Moradin did this was to weaken him, because he wanted, again, so we're going into details in the book that are, and even details that aren't even really contained in the book, that this is, it's not fan theories, it's logical stuff that makes sense, and Jordan has confirmed a lot of it. So basically, Hawkwing conquered everything, right?
Right.
So Randland is made up of 15 different countries, whatever it happens to be.
I really like calling it Randland.
It's the easiest.
It sounds like an amusement park.
There's no name for the continent. The idea is that Hawkwing had control of everything, and if he had control of everything, then when the Dark One comes back, you have a unified force who can fight them off.
Right.
So they wanted to find a way to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
So what he does is he gets in Hawkwing's ear. He's like, send half of your kids halfway around the world, get them to bring their armies with them. And the ones he sent were the ones who were actually most loyal, who still, 1,000 years later, when they're coming back, are like, well, we're coming back to reclaim it. You know, we're coming back.
Right, like Hawkwing. The Shan-Chan see themselves as being the heirs of Hawkwing. Yeah.
The heirs of Hawkwing, because they're still technically loyal, even after 1,000 years of development or whatever.
Yeah.
The rest
versus his empire completely fell apart, essentially, and got divvied into all of these little countries.
Exactly, because the other children spread out and started grabbing for power, and this is my part, and this is my part. So, in effect, Mordred brought down Hawkwing's empire and led directly to the death of Hawkwing, which then led directly to all of the battles that happened to lead to Emmonsfield being Emmonsfield, and the strong blood of the Manetheren people, etc.
Yeah.
That's great.
But but I think that's cool that like it is set in this world, and it's like there's this kind of like King Arthur actually sort of has the role in this book that Arthur had in like the imagination of like 15th century England.
Yeah, as this amazing ruler who did everything right.
Right. Yeah, but he was ages ago, and like he's sort of shrouded in legend, and in the world as it exists right now, like he doesn't really matter that much because he's this like legendary dude who died 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And I really appreciate this is that it's alluded to, but Hawkwing, even when like Hawkwing shows up, because he's one of the heroes that we talked about. He's connected to the horn. So when Matt blows the horn, he pops up. But he doesn't pop up and is the best at everything. He doesn't pop up and is like, I will lead your armies now, boy. He just pops up and he's just a character. He's just like, well, I'm Arthur Hawkwing. What do you want me to do? Well, I'll go over and kill that guy for you. Like,
and the heroes of the horn are sort of like undifferentiated, I mean, except for Birgitta, which is a different thing that, well, we don't have time to get into her, I feel like, at this point.
I'd love to, because I love her.
I know, because she's really cool. But except for her, who essentially like is taken out, is brought into the current world in interesting ways, which we don't have time to talk about. Except for her, like they're kind of like there and they're useful and like that's nice. But like they're barely even characters, like. And they're certainly they're helpful, but they're not. If you only had the horn and called the heroes of the horn, like they wouldn't have won the battle if they didn't have other things going for them.
Hawkwing shows up in 2 books. That's it.
Yeah. Because there's 2 times that they blow the
horn. A couple of the others show up in Telar and Riyadh,
right?
The Dream World, but even then, it's 2.
Yeah.
Like it's not a bunch of them. And then the 2 that show up are very specific characters, one of whom gets ripped out and into the real world when they shouldn't, which is awesome. Yeah, so like Arthur Hawkwing representing King Arthur is like the last of the real medieval connections. So I think we should go on to our next section, Sarah. And it's been a while since I've been able to do this.
Yes.
But let's go to Fabula Nostra. I've been practicing. Where we talk about what we would like to see version of this done as. Like normally when we talk about movies, it's so much easier. Like, what would you like to see in the movie version of this? But I think in this section we're going to talk about what would you like to see happen in the TV series?
Yeah.
And what would you like to have seen happen after the books were finished? Now, I can talk a bit about that because I know what was planned for after the books were finished, but I can also talk about what I want to see in the TV show. So, Sarah, what would you like to see in the Wheel of Time TV show, which is coming up?
So first of all, there are the things I will just say that I already know, which like I think the cast so far looks awesome.
It looks great.
In particular, the fact, by the way, that like it is very much like a diverse cast in a way that I think is fully justified by the novel and also would be awesome and great even if it wasn't. And yeah, I am thrilled thus far with the casting that I have heard, and very, very excited for it. I definitely always have like a little bit of anxiety about what happens when you adapt this kind of massive property to a TV show. I'm hoping they don't rush it. Yeah. I would say like that's definitely one of the things that I'm worried about is that they're going to try to do too much in the first season or two. And that there's going to be too much that's going to get lost.
Yeah, I'm also worried about that, but mostly because I've been reading a lot about what they're planning, and it looks like they're going to try and condense 2 books into a season, and therefore aim for 6 seasons of a TV show. Now, I don't think they're going to be 12 episode seasons, so like they might be a 22 episode season, whatever it happens to be, but that still seems
that
ambitious.
Yeah.
But you can also see why even a company as rich as Amazon wouldn't want to say, well, we're going to start a 15 season or 14 season set of books. So they're going to have to cut out characters.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to cut out plots.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Like, I mean, it was always going to happen. This, as you said, 11,958 pages. You're going to have to cut out something. So obviously, as a long-time fan, I'm sad about that. But also, as long as they do a good job and don't just suddenly dilute it to this is a book or this is a show about Rand and only Rand.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I definitely have a lot of concerns about, especially because like I think like Nynaeve's story and arc is fantastic. I think Egwene's story and arc is fantastic. Like Matt's and Perrin's, I think Matt certainly is. Perrin, I feel like they spend a few books dithering about exactly what they want to do with Perrin.
They cast Perrin with a guy who's like a big dude. Perrin is meant to be a blacksmith level size monster of man. So hopefully the dude works out. One thing that I did want to actually point out is that the actor that they've cast for Lan is Asian American.
Yes.
And I think that's awesome. And he's a beautiful man, as Lan should be. But also it's great because a lot of people do consider the borderlands as representing, as I was saying, Air China represents China, etc. So I think it's awesome that they went with that way of casting them, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And it is also like in terms of like racial stereotypes prevalent in America, like you do often see Asian men represented as not being as stereotypically masculine as men of other backgrounds. Like that is an unfortunate racial stereotype that, you know, is still prevalent in the US. And I do enjoy this as a interesting counter to that. I hope so. Okay, so there's so many things that I definitely did not notice when I was reading the book, that many that like are linked to things that get revealed later that you point out to me, and I hope they keep those. Like I hope they keep like Varen lying in like, I don't know, late season 1 or whatever it's gonna be.
Yeah, like one thing, for example, that I absolutely love is Rand's dad has a sword, and Rand gets the sword at the start of chapter 2. That sword is the mark of a blade master. Like it's marked as somebody who is exceptional with the sword, and it's not until the end of chapter 14, book 14, that it pays off, where Lan meets Tam and has the first proper conversation since book one with him, and sees Tam using the sword, and he's like, "Oh, I always wondered about this guy. I always wondered why did a farmer in a small cottage in the middle of nowhere in arse backwards land have a blade master sword, and now that I see you using it," and he goes, "True blood blade master," like, which is like for somebody like Lan, that's the ultimate sign of respect. I want to see stuff like that carried through, where it's like a little bit that pays off in a huge way.
The one thing with the casting that I'm a little nervous about is casting Ruse Bolton as Tam Althor.
That's so funny to me. It's like, bad guy, always bad guy. Oh, now he's Tam. Oh,
and like,
but he's like the goodest of good guys.
Yeah, because like Ruse seems so sinister to me, and Tam seems so like nice and wholesome.
Yeah, but he's a good actor, so hopefully he can pull it off. But
I feel like I'm just gonna have this like visceral distrust. Like, what's Tam Althor gonna do?
Is there anything you're worried about in terms of the TV series?
Anything that I'm worried about? I will say I'm a little worried about, as we've talked about, I think Jordan did a great job with his female characters. I am worried about whether they are going to do an equally good job in the TV show. Especially because, I mean, this is obviously a different situation, but in Game of Thrones, where I feel like they basically ruined the female characters in the last season. So many feelings. Previous episode.
Oh, yeah, well, listen. It happens to all girls her age, where the period starts.
And you just go nuts and murder
and you just go nuts and burn down an entire city, like.
Yeah, and so, you know, I mean, I guess I don't actually know this offhand. I'm assuming that there's mostly men responsible for the writing and production.
They're mostly men that are writing it, but the guy who is the showrunner has been saying all the right things.
Okay.
Like I've been looking up in interviews. His name is Rafe. I can't remember his second name off the top of my head. I think Longingham, something like that. And everything he says is, no, we understand the female characters are super important. We don't care that the first 3 and 4 books that they are seen as overpowered by the thing. He's like, if you're the kind of person who gets turned off, or you don't like the idea of a strong female character, just don't bother watching the show.
That's good.
We hope to get enough fans without you basically being a toxic fan. So
yeah, that's good. The other thing that I'm just really curious about is I feel like to some extent I don't have 100% a handle on exactly what the physical, like what the magic looks like. What it looks like when somebody channels. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that visualized.
For years, genuinely years, I thought that it would be impossible to represent the magic of the Wheel of Time on screen. And then I saw Doctor Strange, right? And Doctor Strange, have you seen the Doctor Strange movie? You're right. So the way Doctor Strange represents his magic, and it pops up as 3-dimensional figures in the world around him, and instead of just like something happens because he thinks about it, like we obviously we've talked about Merlin before, like Merlin looking at something and concentrating.
Merlin's eyes glows and then some guy dies.
Exactly. Whereas you look at him, he has his object around his neck, which could represent an angreal or a sangreal, and then he makes a hand movement and stuff physically appears in the world. Like, I can see that representing, like, bending the world to walk around. I can see that representing Tel Arin Riyadh to me.
And they are visible. Like, they talk about people who channel are then able to see the weaves.
So I imagine the way that they would do this is that they would show it as different colors and the people manipulating the colors and then making it, and then it would show up. Now, I think they will go light on that for the first couple of seasons, in the same way that they went light on dragons until they hooked people in to the first season of Game of Thrones, and then at the end, eggs, oh my god, there's dragons. One thing that you've just mentioned here is what would have happened in the books after finished it.
Yeah.
So I can talk about that because, again, I do a lot of, I was immersed in this for many, many years. So there was planned to be 2 sets of Outrigger novels.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was going to be about Tam, Roose Bolton, and how he came to end up in the position he was in to find Rand on Dragon.
Yeah.
Because it's alluded to a little bit. And the idea is that he left to go adventuring and find himself in the world, joined up with the army of a particular country. It's Korean. I don't know why I said particular country, because we've been spoiling it the whole way through. But it joined up with the Korean army, trained really hard, became a blade master, got into the private guards of the king. The king cut down a very sacred tree at some stage, which is like the world tree, Avazen de Sora. And the Aiel came out to kill him, basically, and they chased him down the thing. And basically it's going to be that story. And a lot of people, myself included, believe that Tam's father is actually the person who killed the king to end the war.
Interesting.
Because the king is renowned as being a blade master, and because Rand later on gets his sword, and it was said that he was cut down in one-on-one combat. Tam has a blade master sword. In order to get a blade master sword, you have to kill a blade master.
Yeah.
So for him to get that rank, he'll have had to have fight a blade master at that time. So the likelihood is that he is the one who killed Laman for his sin, and effectively Rand's dad ended a war, and that's what the first one was going to be about, which I think is awesome because I love Tam.
Yeah.
And then the second one was going to follow Matt, my favorite character, and he's married to Tuon. They got married by saying we're married.
Well, he first said oh, we're married, you're my wife, because he had this like weird vision. And then somebody was like, by the way, that means that like if she says it back to you at any point, you are now legally married. And he was like, what? Yeah.
And then she did. So now he's married to the Empress of Shankan, the place that owns slaves. And what Jordan was originally planning was that the second, so there'd be a set of Outrigger novels. So there was going to be 3 novels, which focused on Matt and Tuon, which is his wife, going back and removing slavery.
That would be really interesting.
And separating it out. Especially since he somehow manages to make Tuon likable, despite the fact that she's fighting for slavery.
Yes. Tuon, initially because of that, I was like, no, Tuon's terrible. I can't like her because she was like, slavery is great. But she really grew on me.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is because you can see that she wants to keep the empire together.
Yeah.
And also, she's a Suldam herself.
Right,
which
and
means
so it's
that
interesting like that
the
means.
implication is that she would be a Damane if the word got out that Suldam can do that. So I assume that was going to work its way into the thing.
Yeah.
Also, just for the other record, because I need to bring this up, Matt has a medallion that stops people who use magic from being able to directly attack him with magic.
Yeah.
And it's fucking deadly because it's just like, oh. And he also gets attacked by a golem at some stage. I know it's not how they want you to pronounce it, but it's an unliving, unkillable monster.
Right. I mean, obviously another referent is the golem, yes. But there's a way to kill the golem that, in Jewish legend that Matt does not take advantage of, so.
Well, wait, what's the way of killing a golem in Jewish legend, just in case I ever get attacked again?
So written on the forehead of the golem is the word emet, which in Hebrew means truth. And if you erase the first letter of that, then it says met, which means death.
Excellent. You hear that, golem? Next time?
I gotcha. I'm going to fuck up your forehead.
Because all I've been doing is like writing stuff in notes and shoving it in his gob. And what I've been saying is, don't kill Ollie. So I just have to do it every now and then because like whatever golem digestive system works. Once it's gone, it just starts trying to kill me again. Someday you'll do it when I don't have a pen. But no, I just need to take off that first letter. Anyway, Sarah. Yeah, so that's basically the TV show looks good and promising.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I do want to say one thing about toxic fans again, is they cast the roles, and there's a lot of people of color in there, and a lot of people were, oh, I can't believe they're having this, blah 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 blah. Oh, I can't believe this person with this level of dark skin would be cast as Egwene, or whatever it happens to be. But I did then come across one of the funniest things I've ever read, because I couldn't tell if he was being serious or not. And he was like, oh, I've been reading these books for 20 years now, and I've always thought about Egwene as like a sister to me. But the actress they've cast is just so hot. I don't know if I'll be able to look at her the same way. It's like going, what? How can somebody be that clueless? I mean, she's a beautiful woman.
When you have men's criticisms of casting are, I want to have sex with her too badly. And I've heard that multiple times. And it's like, come on, dude.
Let's move on to our next thing, which is the rating segment of the thing. The enumeratio. I'm leaving that in, even if I cut the last conversation we had out, because I just want to hear me break my shit laughing. Sarah, what would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 5?
I'm giving it a 5. I'm gonna do it. I think that, I think it's really amazing world building, and I love the characters, and it's obviously not like a perfect verisimilitude of the medieval world, but I really like what they use from the medieval past as well, which is obviously not the only criteria in the world. I also I love these. I spent the last year and 3 months reading them, and really deeply enjoyed it the whole time, and that's a long time to devote to reading a thing, basically in a row, with, as I said, with the exception of every now and then I'd stop in between books and read something else that I really wanted to read. But, I spent a lot of time choosing to be immersed in this world and feel like it was worth it, which, is a nice feeling.
Excellent. I'm glad you said 5, because otherwise I would have been super sad. So I'm assuming the you can give an extra star thing exists in this, and I don't think I gave an extra star to 13th Warrior. So 13th Warrior, I love it, right? It's great, but it's not a 6-star movie. I just have
you're doing the 6-star.
I'm gonna give a 6-star to this, and the only reason I'm giving a 6-star is because I didn't want to say, oh, it's 10 stars. I've read hundreds of fantasy books, thousands of fantasy books, probably. Jesus Christ, probably, yeah. I've read most of the big fantasy series or whatever. I understand that this is a super long commitment, right? If you're starting to read this and you decide to keep reading it, it's going to take you a long time, right? To put it into the easiest context is that if you took all of the words which are written in Lord of the Rings and put them into the Wheel of Time, you'd have 6 chapters left of book 1 of Wheel of Time. That's true. That's word for word. You'd have 6 full chapters left of Wheel of Time when you're finished. And people love the Lord of the Rings, and it's oh, it's amazing and it's so dense, and you're thinking it's not even the first book. So to take this in and go into this world is a huge commitment for you to take.
Yeah.
But if you do, nothing in the fantasy genre is as rewarding as this. There are lots of people who will tell you, oh, Game of Thrones is better. There are lots of people who will tell you Brandon Sanderson's own work is better. And I'm not going to tell you that for an individual person, it's not, right? Because if you happen to prefer Brandon Sanderson's style of writing, that's okay. If, in the case of George R. R. Martin, you happen to prefer reading about rape over and over and over again, and nothing but atrocities carried out, and everybody is a bastard, even the good characters are bastards, that's fine. I get that. And if that's your brand of realism, then again, that's fine. I don't think anybody who genuinely gives the Wheel of Time a chance will not love the set of books. It's my favorite fantasy series. If you read it, you'll love it, and if you don't, that's fine. we're allowed to have different opinions on.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. I also like Game of Thrones. I like a lot of fantasy series. I like a lot of. I also love Tolkien. But like I think this is one of the like strongest and most interesting and like fantasy series that I've read. It's one that I feel like will really stick with me. And yeah, I absolutely recommend giving it a shot if you are up for the potential commitment of 15 months-ish.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Yeah. So Ollie, where can people find you on the internet?
You can't, Sarah. You're
elusive.
I'm like a ghost. I mean, you can find me in the Media Evil group, which is based around this because I helped to start it. But the other thing I was just going to say is, rather than try looking for me, I think people should try looking for more interesting history-related stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to recommend a Facebook page called Archaeology Uncovered, which I happen to be a member on, and I know Sarah has looked at a couple of times as well. Mm-hmm. And it's basically academics and interested people who post really, really interesting articles covering pretty much anything that could be described as history. So since I've been there a couple of weeks now, and you'd come across, articles about ancient Viking settlements being uncovered in New Zealand, and or down as far as articles written about the compulsion of Spanish regulars to try and fix paintings and murals and ending up making wrong. So because you'll find the whole gamut of stuff. So it's called Archaeology Uncovered. It's on Facebook. I am not in any way affiliated with them whatsoever, but I am a member. They are all really, really interesting people. They're all really progressive, and they all really enjoy having a conversation about history. As you know, I'm a history fan, despite the fact that I am a very, very sexy physicist. I still enjoy talking to people who know way more about stuff than I ever will, and that's why I started the podcast with Sarah in the first place, and it's why I like to hang out in that group. So go to Archaeology Uncovered.
Awesome.
And the last thing I'm going to say is, if you do get the Wheel of Time and you happen to be an audiobook listeners, the audiobooks for the Wheel of Time are some of the best done you ever come across. For every male POV, they have a guy read them. For every female POV, they have a female read them. Jesus. They have a woman read them. And they're both excellent, and they don't put on like weird accents or anything like that. They just read them out, and it's really well done, except for when they're in tear, in which case she does. Kate's her name, and she slurs her speech because I think it's pretty funny. She's like,
see, I want to hear the Shan drawl.
Yes, that's also done too. Okay, Sarah, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can, of course, find me on this podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media Evil on Apple Podcasts. I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. If you're listening to this, write a review so I can read it. I haven't had any in a while.
Wait, I have one here.
Oh.
It says, bring back that sexy physicist guy. Sorry. It's my mom again.
I'd be thrilled if your mom listened to the podcast.
My mom
does she want to guess?
Oh my God, you would not want my mom as a guest. She'd be like, when are we talking about the Protestants, is it? Anyway. Sorry.
We could have a double mom episode.
Oh, my mom and your mom would get on great.
That'd be fun.
They'd probably kill each other.
Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media Evil Pod, and join the Facebook group as mentioned before. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifdecker. And also, if you have any questions or suggestions, I'd love to hear from you via email at media.evilpod@gmail.com. I will at some point sometime soon potentially be starting to solicit questions if you would like to do an Ask a Medievalist, and perhaps include that as a segment on the podcast. So
what was that noise? Oh, it was an email coming through. Just click on it there. Oh, we have a question. Can we get more of that? Ma'am, God damn it.
She's your biggest fan.
She is.
So, Ollie, thank you so much for coming back on Media Evil.
Yeah, I couldn't not come back and talk about Wheel of Time. You're going to need to find something else that I love that's somehow tangentially or connected to the medieval world in order to get me back. I mean, I could conceivably come back for Prince of Thieves.
Yeah.
Or The Man in the Iron Mask. But anyway, It's always a pleasure, Sarah. And the podcast, just in case people don't, because I don't mention this, but the podcast is way better without me.
Oh.
That's not a joke. It really is. So I'm sorry for ruining it for people.
You did not.
Sarah, always a pleasure. I'll say bye-bye.
All right. Goodbye, and thank you for listening to Media Evil.